Rich, welcome to the podcast. Your journey has been really interesting to me from looking from the outside. Obviously, I'm based in the UK, you're in the US, and I've been quite interested in some of the little snippets that I've heard here and there from your story, whether it's been on two wheels or running King's Garage in America. Um, Now, I can't wait to get into this and discover more about what makes you tick. So, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you very much, Sam. Delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I look forward to the conversation we're gonna.
Fantastic. So I believe today you're in the shop, right? Are you at work?
Yeah, I'm in the shop right
Excellent. Okay. So can you geek out a little bit with me? I'm not massively into motorbikes and racing, but I am interested in the subject. So what got you into bikes in the first place?
now. The brutal, honest truth. I had more money than sense,
Okay, that's interesting.
and was kind of bored. So a long time ago in my early 20s, or I'm sorry, in my early teens, I had a motorcycle for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. Well, no, I'm sorry. That was after I left home. Um, but before that, I had a motorcycle. My first motorcycle I had for like 2 weeks. My mom was gone on vacation. I had to hide it in the garage. When she got home, she found it 2 days later, told me to get this thing out of the garage. Anyways, um, back in November 2012, like I said, I was kind of bored. I was semi-retired. Um, it was kind of one of those, what am I going to do? Being retired isn't the thing for me. Because after 3 months, I was driving everybody nuts. At the time, my fiance, I was driving her nuts. I was driving myself nuts because I just can't bait. I can't stay idle. So I bought within 3 weeks, I bought four motorcycles, two street bikes, and two track bikes. And the only reason why I bought track bikes is because my friends, a few of my friends that I knew had bikes, had always talked about, going to the track. And they said, if you ever want to go to the track, never take your own motorcycle because it's going to be expensive to repair. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of a dumb thought because if you take your own personal bike there and you crash it, yeah, it's going to be expensive to repair, but how much more expensive is it to buy another bike just strictly for the track?
Yeah.
But but I was that knucklehead that did that. So a month later, December 2012, I went to my first track day, and then I was so addicted after that first day that I went to every track that I could drive to in a 5 hour radius from where I
Oh wow.
live. So sometimes I was gone 1 weekend a month, sometimes I was gone 4 weekends a month. And then April 2013, 4 months later, I started racing. And then by September 2013, I opened a shop. So the time span between getting on the bike or purchasing four bikes and owning a shop was less than a year.
Wow. What? Okay. Okay. I have so many questions. Um, that's so fascinating. So it was really quick.
Yes.
What made so when you first got those bikes, what made you particularly four? Why not one of each? Why four?
Because I ended up my first bike I got had by that time I'd been off a bike for about 27 years.
Right. Okay.
So the first bike I bought was a 2000 Ducati 996. Not something you would want to buy after not being on one for 27 years because it's an extremely powerful bike. It's a beautiful bike. It's a motorcycle that they're claiming the motorcycle industry is they're the Ferraris of motorcycles, and they are beautiful bikes. And I thought, what the hell? And so I bought another naked bike. And then, like I said, with the two street bikes, that's kind of the reason why I went with four bikes.
Yeah.
Other than, I guess back then I still had an ego. Um, Pretty much, I bought four bikes because I could.
Yeah. That
And
makes sense.
yeah, it's because I could. Kind of being the egotistical guy that I used to be back then. Yeah, that's pretty much why.
And you say that you'd been on a bike 27 years previous to that. Were you a part of a biker gang, as it were, or like community, or what? How would you experience bikes before?
There was no community. I grew up in a very small valley in Southern California, and I think when I got my motorcycle, I think I was only one of three people in the entire valley that had one.
Oh wow.
So this was back in what, the late 80s. So not very many people. And because we're so isolated and secluded in that valley, not a whole lot goes on there. So, when I got a motorcycle, like I said, I think only three or four other people in the entire valley had one. So
Wow.
most of the time I rode by myself just because the valley is far stretched between four different cities. And yeah, I just kind of started riding myself. And then, because mom found it in the garage, that kind of nixed that for a while. But it wasn't until my late teens, right before I graduated high school, because I wasn't living at the house at the time, is when I picked up a bike, and I had that bike for a couple of years. Um, but honestly, that's not what spurned me to do this.
Mm,
Which was kind of weird because in most cases, when you get into some sort of lifestyle or business entity, it's usually something you're very familiar with.
mhm.
And in my case, I'm not. It wasn't something that was familiar to me at all because I had been away from it for so long. It was kind of relearning how to ride a bike again. But as far as, that curiosity turned into hobby, turned into profession, and turned into business. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case for me.
I find that quite. I like the honesty of that as well, and the fact that it wasn't an obvious route. It wasn't something that, oh, one day I'm gonna open up a bike shop. Like, it just wasn't a thing, and it's you came across it. Was was it more out of a necessity, or was it more out of a I'm starting to, my bike gets trashed every weekend or whatever it was. I need to learn how to fix this, and then you helped other people, or how did you come across it?
It was more out of necessity at the time. At the time that I decided to open up a motorcycle shop, it started out as a storage space for my race bikes, is what it did.
Oh,
Because
right, okay.
at the time, my fiance and I had split up, and we'd been together for 13 years. So all of my race bikes and my race equipment were in the garage. So I needed to get it out of there. I found that most storage places, you can't park vehicles that have fluids in them. You can't work on them. They're very different and very strict here in the States. So when I found the shop, I was looking for nothing but a storage place. And so when I talked to the landlord about it, kind of, he was asking me what business I was going to get into, and I said, honestly, I just need a storage place for my race equipment and my bikes because I'll be in and out of here a couple of times a week. Um, and because I was semi-retired, I didn't really have a job. So it was like, I'll come tinker around in here. And then after I got into here, I had just was at the tail end of finishing up my rookie season from racing.
Oh wow.
We usually have anywhere from 2 months to maybe 3 months in the off season to do stuff. So I was here working on bikes. The landlord had come in and asked me. He goes, "Hey, you could open a motorcycle shop." I'm like, "No, why the hell would I do that?" Because there are not any good ones around. I'm like,
Oh.
"Yeah, okay." And my mindset wasn't there at the time about doing that. So I was like, "Yeah, whatever." And so it took me like a week, and I sat here and I thought, why not? Um, and I was like, why not? How could it? It couldn't hurt anything. So my mindset was, let's work on bikes, make a little bit of money, and go racing full time. That was kind of my thought process until I realized, and at the same time, I decided to um, do both cars, trucks, vans, or automobiles and motorcycles because I have a long history in the automotive industry. Um,
Oh wow.
when I did that, I was thinking, okay, this could work. I could try to play the percentage, you know, cars, trucks, vans, motorcycles, play the percentages. And then I think it was like the first or second week I opened up the shop and I kind of opened the doors. I looked around and I'm like, this is the dumbest idea I ever had because I am surrounded by automotive shops that have been here 20 plus years that have
Mm.
clientele, that have the business, that have the pricing structure. You're a dumbass. So, and that was kind of my thought, and that's kind of how it started. Then it quickly took on a mind and an attitude of its own because I soon realized that, I know a lot about the automotive industry, but when it comes to motorcycles, there are very few connections between the two. However, the
Mm,
concepts are identical. A four-stroke motor is a
okay.
four-stroke motor. And so whether it's a car, truck, van, or motorcycle, they operate the same. So if they have similarities in how they function, that also means they have similarities in how they fail. And so that's the thing that I've stressed upon over the years when I meet people that are in the automotive industry, but they bring me their motorcycles and they're like, I work on cars, man. I don't work on bikes. And I just kind of look at them and go, what do you do? And tell me I work in the automotive industry. I said, you know what? I started out this motorcycle shop only having automotive experience. If you understand the concept,
Yeah.
then it becomes it's more the switch of the mind in a sense. Instead of
Hmm.
looking at it, it's like when we do a track walk. When I'm walking a track prior to either qualifying or racing, and it's a track I've never been to. Usually, what I'll do is I'll walk up to the first turn. Whether for this example, let's say it's a 90-degree left-hand turn, looking at the turn based off of the front straightaway, I'm thinking in my head, maybe 120, 130 to make this turn. So I can walk all the way up to the turn left, but I'll also turn around to kind of see where I'm coming from.
Hmm.
And
With
that'll
the
give me,
approach of it.
yes, and that'll
Yeah.
give me a better idea on how I can approach the turn to make it to the next one. And I tell them that, when you're looking at concepts or things that are identical, you have to look at them forward and backwards because if their operation is identical, so are their fail points. And that's kind of how
Right.
sometimes people don't have that ability to kind of turn around and look at it from the other direction.
That's a really good perspective, and it makes a lot of sense as you say that now that you of how you started with let's do everything because it kind of makes sense to. And did you get to a point where you were then you've kind of touched on it a little bit there. There's loads of automotive garages around, but not so many bikes. So then you stuck to with the thing you enjoyed the most, was it, or it just naturally faded out because you prefer to do the bikes?
No, I was always going to do motorcycles, but I used
Okay,
my background in automotive to kind of help
sure.
that and propel
To
that
get
a
you
little
there.
bit. Um,
Yeah.
so what I ended up doing because of the lack of knowledge, skill set, and just overall experience on a motorcycle, the first 2 years that the shop was open, I was open for 7 days a week. Didn't take a day off, didn't take vacation time, didn't take a sick day because I
Wow.
knew I was behind the eight ball when it came to everything on a motorcycle. So I needed to inundate myself in the automotive, I'm sorry, in the motorcycle, not community, but in the motorcycle mechanics and understanding and the diagnostics of motorcycles. And it was after 2 years, and it was a struggle. Every bike that
Sure.
came in, although it could have been, a bike from 2006. And here I am at, that bike that was a 2006, Honda comes in, that's a brand new to me. I haven't touched that thing. Never
Yeah.
seen it before, never put my hands on it. And so every time a motorcycle would come in here for no matter what it needed, whether it was, an oil change, I would try to reverse engineer everything I can get my hands on for the entire time that bike was here. So if it was only here for a couple of hours, I would
Oh
take a
wow.
look and go, okay, let's look at something simple. Let's look at headlights. And then that threw me down a rabbit hole for headlights because it is unbelievable how many different types of platforms of the same manufacturer have different ways of changing out as simple as a fucking light bulb. And so it was kind of that premise that I started realizing, hey, if it's a sport bike, they kind of have two different ways that they're going to go on there. If it's single light or if it's double light, there's two different ways you can get to it. If it's a cruiser bike, oh, it's a whole different setup. And then when you have the adventure bike and all of these in the same manufacturer, that headlight setup is completely different. So I was like, oh, great, here we go. And so it was kind of that concept that I kept just going through and going because that was the only lead that I had was okay,
Okay.
let's start with light bulbs or headlights and then the lights themselves. And then so what I did is I would change it up every once in a while where I would look at doing an oil change. Why is it some filters required or some bikes uh, some motorcycles that are similar, but they have different setup for the oil change, and running into oil changes that unless you've done it on this particular bike, you wouldn't realize they had a dual drain plug system where the first drain plug that you would take out of the belly pan is just a cover. The actual drain plug from the oil tank is inside that hole. And so if you didn't know that and you went to take the drain plug out and dropped it, it would drop inside the interior pan that you'd have to take off the bike just to get to it, that actually didn't house any oil in it to begin with. So
Oh my goodness.
it's understanding those little dynamic things that
Yeah.
I got to do for 2 years straight, was really understanding things. Um, and then after those 2 years, there wasn't anything on a bike I didn't know about. I wasn't an expert whatsoever. Even today, I don't call myself an expert at all. It's just me. This is how I do things. Um, but there wasn't a whole lot about a bike I didn't know. And there wasn't much I didn't know about each manufacturer. I could pick out the differences between manufacturer to manufacturer. Um, but they were pretty similar all the way across the board, with very different subtleties. But you would have to work on a particular service through all of the different manufacturers to understand and notice the differences.
Wow. So it's quite cool to see that you didn't just, obviously, you come in for you bring your bike in, I'll fix it. That's the job. I'll charge you for the job. Whilst I have the time, I'm going to understand this bike
Mhm.
because I don't know when I'm going to see it again. That is something that I think more people should be doing. Just with whatever, you could do that with any walk of life, like running the business or absolutely anything. If you've got something in your hands and you don't know how long you're going to have it for, work it out. Like as you say, deconstruct bits of it to understand it
Mhm.
for the next one. And that's a really, really interesting way of doing it. A good mindset for sure.
It's trying to understand what you're looking at
Mm.
in a much broader range than just doing the oil change service. Because if you're just doing the oil change, and that kind of that brings me to where I kind of perfected that a little bit, where because I would do that in the early days, that I was looking to reverse engineer as much as I could. Now what it does is that's the way that I actually do a service inspection, because I was so used to reverse engineering everything that the way I teach it even to my apprentice today is when you're doing the oil change, as you're sitting there draining the plug or pulling the drain plug, it takes nothing but feeling to unscrew that drain plug. So open up your eyes, lift your head, and just start looking at the line as you're pulling the drain plug out. Because what you start doing is you start scanning to see things that are really close to you right in front of you. If it doesn't look right, there's probably something wrong. But if it does, it gives you a really good chance to go, from the front of the bike to the rear of the bike, pull the drain plug off, and then as you scoot your seat back, now you can scan the motorcycle in a broader spectrum. So instead of because there are two differences between looking at something or seeing something. And so that's the
Right. Okay.
concept that I put on the motorcycle, just to do a service inspection, is while we're doing work on it, let's look to see what we find, if anything. And so it kind of goes with what I started, but it transitioned over something that has a little bit more meaning.
Mm. A lot more. And do you find as well? Well, one of my questions was, which has been answered, that even within the same manufacturer, it's different on different bikes, like with the headlights and things. Do you find that there's quite a lot of differences, even if it's track bikes or road bikes or what are the different types of motorcycles that you have? Do you find that there's quite a lot of differences between them? Vast differences between them?
Every manufacturer is very different, from the seated position to the length of distance from the handlebars to where you're going to reach the bars, the different angles for your foot pegs based on um, the angle of uh, your leg. Excuse me. Each manufacturer has their own kind of setup. And so that's usually going to be the major difference, is how each of the manufacturers' bikes are set up. They're set up for themselves based on whatever criteria or data or information that they had gathered over the years on how the bike should be set up, how far the pull or how far the reach should be for the bars, how far the seat should be off the ground, how far should the rear sets be where you put your foot, or the foot pegs be where you put your feet down, and that's going to be specific between the manufacturers. The funny thing about that is each bike coming from the manufacturer, I don't think they've changed it since the beginning. But as far as suspension setup goes, most of your Japanese bikes are set up for 155 to 165 pound person.
Okay.
And in today's world, in the motorcycle industry, there's a very small percentage of people that fall in that category.
Yeah, no doubt.
But it is something that's one of the things that I know is similar to them. But
Mm,
everything else outside of that, completely different.
mm, mm,
I mean, not so much. I would say different just from a manufacturer standpoint, but not
mm,
so different that there is an extreme noticeable difference. I can notice a little subtleties and differences because I am on different manufacturers every single day.
yeah.
So I can see the subtle differences. I can feel them. You know, um, one manufacturer has a seat that's high enough and makes you feel like you're sitting on the tank. The other manufacturer has you so low it feels like you're sitting inside the fuel tank.
Mm.
It's very subtle differences that unless people have a chance to ride multiple manufacturers, it's hard for them to understand that and see.
Do you get a lot of people or any people that come to you for advice on I have a question like that. I like to ride high or whatever it is. Do you get people asking what manufacturer or what bike should I go with if I like this or do you have that as well?
Almost every
Yeah, I
day.
bet.
So the easiest way that I explain it to people, if it's like their first bike,
Mm,
and it's usually those are the type of questions I would get from somebody that it's like their first
sure.
bike. So what I would tell them is, hey, why don't you go to your local dealership, because we have motorcycle dealerships here in the States carry multiple manufacturers. And
Mhm,
so
mhm,
they're not a single entity. They're not like a
yeah.
Triumph dealership or a Harley dealership or Ducati dealership. A lot of times, Harley and Triumph are separate, but everybody
Mm,
else is usually you can go to one dealership and it's kind of like, a mall. You've got everything in there.
yeah,
And I
sure.
would tell them, I said, if when they have demo days, go
Mm,
there because they will allow you to ride many different manufacturer platform bikes to see which one fits you. I said,
yeah, that's cool.
you never want to get on a bike because your buddy says it's the best thing ever, or he says it's the best thing ever. He's only been on a bike for 6 months and he doesn't know any better and he doesn't know any
Yeah.
different. And so the best way to see what bike is going to be conducive for you, number one, go to the manufacturer or go to a dealership, see if you can test ride a multitude of bikes. I said, but pick out a specific platform. Do you want a
Mm,
sport bike or do you want a naked bike because their ergonomics are very different? What CC category platform do you want to go to? Because if you're going to switch back and forth and go, and let's just use the 600 realm, you've got a Yamaha R6, you've got a Gixxer 600, which is the Suzuki, you've got a Kawasaki ZX6, and then you can fall over into the naked bike series, which would be a 700 or 650, but because they are set up completely differently, it's going to ride and respond to you more different than a sport bike did. And so
mm,
I've told them, I said, you have to ride them to understand. You could always go out there and pick out and buy the brand new shiniest thing there. You can, but you're gonna have to learn how to ride that bike in its current setup. If you want to get your first bike to be a comfortable, easy riding bike, my suggestion is look for a naked bike because that is a more upright seated position motorcycle because
mhm,
dynamically as humans, we sit upright to begin with anyways. Sitting leaned over a fuel tank throws off the center of gravity even for your body, which means you're going to have to understand the center of gravity to get that bike to turn. It can be done, it's just very uncomfortable. But if you're sitting in a more upright seated position motorcycle, you have more confidence because you're used to being in that seated position and you have better control of the bike because you have a better center of gravity. Now, the only thing you have to choose from is what CC range you want to go to. Understand if it's like a 300 CC, much lighter, very nimble, doesn't have a whole lot of power as far as going on the freeway. But if it's something to learn on, you could learn on it, and for most people, they'll outride that bike in less than a year. Or you can go to something a little bit higher, to a 400, 500, 700 range and higher. But you have to understand, the higher in the CC range you get, the more options and obstacles start to come into play, because now you're dealing with a bike that is much heavier, has more momentum, takes a little bit more understanding on how to slow that bike down, and not only that, how to control the bike under throttle conditions. So that's kind of in a short version on how I would explain.
Yeah, that's I guess it's when they go on those days where they would then check it out and just how it feels for them, what they actually, because sometimes you wouldn't know what you want until you're on it. You don't know what it feels like and what the other ones would feel like and how comfortable you are on
Exactly.
certain ones, I guess. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's really cool. When you were do you still race now? Do you still race?
Um, excuse me. So I took off. Let's see. Wait, it's 2025. Sorry. So I took off the 2024 season um, for personal reasons. I talked to my sponsor and just let them know, hey, in 2024, I've got a lot of things going on in the shop. I really need to pay a little bit of attention to the shop, take care of a lot of the builds that I have in here. I said I hate putting them back and setback after setback. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to take 2024 off. We talked about racing again in 2025. I hadn't heard from my rep. Typically, when contract time comes up for my sponsor, it's usually in November, December, and they'll
Right.
come to the shop. We'll discuss it. We'll say yes or no, handshake deal. We're done for the year. So I didn't see him in December, so I'm thinking, well, maybe I might see him in January, because I know sometimes they'll overlap their budget meetings. And
Okay.
then I didn't see him, and it wasn't until like
Hmm.
March, April, so it's May now. It would have been late March, early April.
Oh, well.
I had a rep come in from that company, and so we talked about it. He said, "Yeah, your rep that you've had for years actually left the company for health reasons." I'm like,
Wow.
"Oh, that kind of explains it." And he goes, "So honestly, I don't have any information about your racing program with us." I was like, "Huh." That kind of stuff, because we had talked about it. I
Yeah.
explained it to him,
Yeah.
and I said, it is what it is. I get it. I understand it. I said, I'm good with it. I was taking 2025 off anyways to kind of finish up a few things here. And then like 3 weeks later, another rep from the same law firm came in, and I'm like, what the heck's going on? He goes, so we transferred that other guy. I'm like, okay. So we started talking about, he kind of looked around and just asked me, what do you know? I know we have a file on you uh, about your shop. And so we just started talking. And I told him, about the race program. And he just kind of looked at me and he's like, that's kind of weird. And I go, why is that? He goes, because our law firm does not sponsor individual racers. We sponsor
Okay.
teams. And I said, yeah, I know that. And he
Okay.
goes, even in, with Moto America, which is the professional racing series here in America, he goes, even Moto America, we don't sponsor individuals. They have to be on a team. And because we are locked in with Harley Davidson, that's where most of our sponsorship money and time goes to, is anybody that races Harley Davidson. He goes, but I don't understand how we did it with you. And I looked at him and I said, King's Garage. And he looks at me and he goes, that's how we did it. And I said, yep. He goes, not only you're a racer, that's the thing that got me right off the bat. He goes, but you own the shop. We sponsor the shop.
Okay. Okay.
And that's how, and he goes, yes, that's how we do
We're
it.
back on.
He goes, we're back on track. And he said, look, you want to race 2026? I'm like, yeah, obviously. And he goes, sweet, shoot me a budget no matter how many bikes. And then we started talking about that. And he goes,
Mm,
well, no matter the series, whether it's one bike or six bikes,
mhm.
send me a budget analysis. I'll throw it up to the bosses. Let's see if we can get you back for racing full time for 2026. I'm like, okay, that works
Nice.
for me. So as far as answering your question, I think it's been 2.5 years, maybe 3 years, the last time I raced competitively, which is, and for me in doing something like that, it is not uncommon. When I came out of semi-retirement, I hadn't raced competitively in 4 years. But when this very, very enormously large law firm in the States here um, just happened. We were talking. I was talking to the rep, and he made me an offer to go to racing, and I was like, "Wait, what?" He goes, "What if we convince you to come out of semi-retirement to go back to racing?" I'm like thinking, yeah, you can always do that, but what's the catch?
Yeah. Yeah, come on. Yeah.
You know,
What's the deal?
what's the give here? What do I got to give up? And he goes nothing. He goes, let's do it. And he goes, we do it fairly simply. We do it off of a handshake deal. We don't carry contracts. He says the only thing we require is you make 80% of the races, and anytime you're at the track, just give a photo and a small report about being at the track, and that's it. And I said, okay, because at the time, not only did I own the shop, but I work as a track instructor, or
Okay.
what we call control rider, um, and then racing. And so when we talked about it, I said, so basically what we're trying to do is piggyback off my reputation. He goes, yeah, you own a shop. We are a very large, he goes, we're the largest law firm in the United States, one of the largest. And he goes, so yeah, let's see what we can do together. I was like,
Yeah.
all
It's
right, that works
partnership,
for
isn't it?
me.
Yeah.
And so I waited till the weekend before, or I waited till the week before the first race before I said anything on social media, because my rep was like, "Hey man, were you gonna say anything? Were you gonna put it out there?" And I said, "No." I said, I can, but I'm not like that." I said, "I don't like boast or brag about it." I said, "For me, I get closer to where the time is, and then I have kind of like for myself like a release date. Hey, I'm coming back to racing. This is who's going to help with my race program, yada yada, and then we'll just go on from there." But when I had released that, within days, I had hundreds of DMs, and I had
Wow.
a lot of people asking me questions. And the number one question was, how does a guy that hasn't competed competitively for 4 years come back to racing, number one? Number two, has one of the largest law firms sponsoring him for an entire season. How the hell does that fucking work?
Talk us through it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and
Wow.
and I've been asked that so many times. I've
Yeah.
explained it to him individually, and I've explained it to him kind of at the track. And I told him, I said, here's what you have to really understand. And I said, anybody that is a motorcycle racing industry sponsor, you got to remember one thing: they don't make a goddamn dime off you whatsoever. Anything they
Yeah.
produce or make, they make millions of dollars in the general public. You,
Mhm.
not a dime. But what you have to understand is companies that large, they need a tax shelter. And so by donating to race teams, that's a tax shelter. So inadvertently, you're just a tax shelter. When you get to understand that, oh,
Yeah. The
they're
mechanics of
paying me to race. No, they're not. They are making more money off the tax shelter they're going to save by giving you money because they're going to save more money off. And so that's kind of the same, the concept, of understanding. And I told him, I said, we are both going and representing each other off our reputations. And I said, that's kind of how it goes. And I said, once you can understand that they're not making any money off you, and what they care about is the reputation, they really don't care what you do in racing. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, the only requirement they have is 80% of the races, photo.
turn
That's
up.
it.
Yeah.
And they said, it doesn't matter where I finish, doesn't matter anything. There's no contingency prize, there's no placement prize. They're just giving me a check and say, here you go race. And I said, that's kind of how it works. But you have to understand the reason why they're doing it, and at the same time be okay with it. I said, I'm okay if somebody else wants to pay the fees other than me, because I got a lot of
Yeah.
other stuff to pay for. But that's kind of
No,
how it worked out.
yeah, that's really cool. And I hadn't seen that side of the sponsorship side before, or understanding the concept of how it works. I think that's quite an interesting dynamic for sure to
Mhm.
to understand. Thank you for sharing that. With the racing, you said the word reputation quite a lot. What is your reputation? What do you believe your reputation is?
That's a pretty deep question, because what I do for myself, and how I do things here in the shop aren't always motorcycle related. I'll get phone calls from customers. And it's weird because I realized this about myself probably 5 or 6 years ago. A customer called me on the phone with a problem with their bike. And the first thing I asked is, Harry, what year, make, and model of the motorcycle? And they'll tell me. And then I said, okay, explain to me what's going on. And so they'll explain it to me. Usually within 3 to 4 minutes, I can already have diagnosed the bike without even seeing it. And usually what I'll do is, the way that I do that is, it's about how you structure questions. So before I did all this, in my former life, I had worked for 3 different fire departments. I had worked in a trauma center as a trauma technician for 5 years. I've owned
Oh,
a
wow.
paramedic company and did a military contract providing ALS ambulances to the U.S. Army. So I have a very, very large background in the medical industry. So
Mm.
when customers are on the phone talking to me about their bikes, it's like doing signs and symptoms for a patient, you
Mhm.
know. And when we do signs and symptoms, it's like an acronym we call ham: history, allergies, and meds. And that's what we're going to talk to the customer about: the history of your medical condition. Are you allergic to any medications? What medications are you currently taking, or what medications are you currently taking, and have you taken before that you no longer on? So in that same concept, like we had talked about before, how I work things into it, I bring that to how I talk to customers on the phone, because now I can understand what they're describing to me. And then what I'll do is I will curtail the question
Mhm.
to look for the answer that I'm wanting to hear, to see if it's going to make me go down one road or the other. And
Mhm.
usually
Mhm.
if it's within what I'm expecting to hear, because I'm already thinking in my head what the possibilities are, then I'll start going down that road. And then I'll ask them another question as a follow-up question to going that direction. And if the answer that I get doesn't equate, I'll go the other way. And so it's the concept of understanding how to do that, but that experience comes from the medical industry when I'm doing patient assessment. Um, and so I think with that alone, just talking to customers, I don't have that's one of the reputations that I have. The other one is if I help somebody find a problem on their bike, or let's say they were trying to diagnose an issue, and I've had this happen in the last 2 weeks, where two people had done this and asked me my opinion. If you have gotten so far as to partially looked at your bike to see what the problem is, and based on the questions that we are talking about and the answers that I'm getting, and I think that based on what you've already done, you have the capability of just finishing it. You just need to be pointed in a better direction, or the more correct direction to complete
Mhm.
it. I'll do that. And I will tell them, hey, if you run into a problem, just call me back. I don't mind walking people through things over the phone, because there are sometimes, yes, I get it. This is a business. We make money off of servicing, repair, build motorcycles. But if it's something that I think you can fix at home, like I can't tell you how many times I've had people call me about how much it costs to put a battery in. I tell them right
Oh,
off the bat, I
wow.
said, do you know how to take the seat off? Yeah. Do you know where the battery's located? Yeah. Okay. Do yourself a favor, don't and me a favor. Go buy a battery, install that thing. Don't bring your bike all the way to me just to have me and pay me to put a battery in that. It's kind of, and I said I don't mean to say it this way, but it's kind of fucking stupid. You're gonna spend however, if you don't have AAA, then you're gonna spend, it's like $120 for a tow truck to get it here. You're gonna spend $120 for the battery, and then you're gonna pay me $40 to put it in. Stupid. Save all
Yeah.
the money. Go buy a battery. Install it. If you can get the seat off, you can see the battery. You can pull the terminal bolts off of it. You can install your own. Yeah, but what if it doesn't start? Okay, that's a secondary issue. I said primary issue is we got no power. So without power, you'll never know it's going to start to begin with anyway. So let's start there. So that's part of the reputation. The other reputation is because of how I had gotten into this industry. I look much more broader and deeper on a motorcycle. The reputation that I have gotten over the years is, if we can't fix it, there's only one guy I know that can fix it or solve the problem, and that's my shop. I have been sent many bikes from many other motorcycle shops, or they'll just say,
Wow.
hey, we can't repair this. We don't even know what the problem is. There's only one guy we know that might be able to figure this out. Take it to him. I
Oh,
can't tell you how
wow.
many times I've gotten phone calls from customers about doing that. I had a customer once that called me and said, "Hey, um, I have a particular uh, cruiser bike, and it's a Kawasaki Vulcan." He goes, "I had spent thousands of dollars doing performance modifications at a different shop. When it was done, I took it out for an inaugural 300-mile ride. Halfway into the ride, the bike shut off." I'm like, and that's kind of usually how I take it. I'm like, okay. So where you did it shut off, or did you stop, turn the bike off, and then come back and it did start again?
Mhm.
Just
Yeah.
cranked over and starts. He said no, it happened while it ran. I'm like, okay, while it ran. So were you in fifth gear? At throttle, yes. And then it just shut off, yes. Did the lights stay on in the dash or the instrument cluster, or did they go out? He said, I'll be honest with you, I don't remember. I said, fuel injected or carburetor? Fuel injected. Okay. All right, give me a minute. Because there are a lot of things. And I explained this to him. I said, the difference is if the bike is just sitting there idling and it stops, there's about maybe 6 things that'll cause a problem. However, if you're riding at speed, in top gear, on the throttle, and it stops dead, there are more intricate things that can go wrong that has to cause that problem. I said, because you lose a signal as far as cam timing or crank timing. That'll do it. I said, but the thing is, you got to think of it from the standpoint of, I just had all this work done. And I said, that's where the monkey wrench comes into play. It was all this work was done.
Okay.
And I just said, yeah, I could probably look at it. I said, but, why don't you take it back to the guy that did it? He goes, I did. He won't touch it because he doesn't know. I go, what do you mean doesn't know? He tried, but no, and I said, okay. He goes, just to let you know, I've been to 7 motorcycle shops. I have paid thousands of dollars in diagnosis fees that nobody's been able to find this problem. I'm like, then how the heck did you get my number? He goes, well, I called one of the shops in Huntington Beach called Attack Performance. They're a race shop. They're very well known in the Motor America industry, professional racing. And he said, I called and talked to them, and because it's not a bike that they do, they pointed me to a shop in the city of Orange called AP Motor Arts. And I said, who'd you talk to, Andy or Gil? And he goes, well, I talked to Gil, and apparently you guys know each other. I said, yeah, I've known Gil and Andy in the race industry. And he said, I talked to Gil, and Gil said, because we're in the middle, they're also a race shop. He said, because we're in the middle of race season, we're not going to be able to touch this bike. He goes, not only that, with the issue that you have going on, I don't know anybody that would, but there's only one guy. He goes, it's somebody that I know, somebody that I trust. If he can't find it, nobody's ever going to be able to find it.
Wow.
And he goes, the issue with him is he's extremely busy. He said, so take it over there, talk to him, give him information, and then just leave the bike alone. Just leave it. He's like, okay. So he came over, brought me the bike, and we, had a conversation. And he leaves, and I'm looking at the bike, and I'm scratching my head. I'm going through my head each and every time I'm looking at the bike. I'll turn it on, turn it off, try to get it started, cranks over, no start. I'm just thinking about the entire time about everything that was done to the bike. Is it correlated or is it related to the issue? Because almost everything that he had done to the bike is directly related to the issue. But at the same time, sometimes on those factors, you have to think, something directly linked to the cause of the problem is usually the first thing you look at. Sometimes you have to go to something that's indirectly linked to the root and the cause of the problem. And so that's what I really started looking at. I would tested a couple of sensors, the pickup signal, tested the coilover system, looked at the injectors, and just started looking at little things to see if I can how like when you're a kid digging in the mud, digging for treasure in the dirt, you find some little speck of something that's yellow. You're like, yes, it's here. And you start digging for it even more. That's kind of the concept. It was like, I'm not 100% sure based on what's going on with the bike. There's way too much that happened. And so the one thing kicked in my head was he had done a remote ignition, an ignition remote move. He moved the ignition switch to a remote spot. And so I had looked at that and I thought, wait a minute. They moved the ignition. Kawasaki was one of the very first motorcycle manufacturers that came up with an anti-theft device in line in the wire harness to their ECU. And the way they had done that was, so when you turn the ignition key on, you always have a direct 12-volt battery going to the ignition switch. When you turn the key on, it disperses 12 volts to the rest of the motorcycle connectors that need to be in that on position. One of them is the ECU. But Kawasaki came up with the idea of putting in a resistor for the power wire going to the ECU that it will only read 9 volts. If it reads more than 9 volts, it'll shut off the ECU. Won't work. And so I remembered that, and I remembered that they put an inline resistor. So I thought, I wonder. So I disconnected the ignition switch and I pulled it out of its slot. It was stuffed in a little skinny spot. right at the end of the tank, and I pulled it out and I looked at it. I'm like, there you go. What happened was, so the resistor's only that big, but the pigtails on the end of the resistors are that big. So because they were shoving it into a very small confined space, what they did is they took the pigtails and bent them and
Mm.
then soldered on each side of it and then shoved it in the hole. Over time, when you bend something that's like that, because that motorcycle is a twin cylinder motorcycle, it vibrates just like a Harley.
Mm.
150, 200 miles into the ride, it vibrated so bad it snapped it. It snapped the
Wow.
pigtail. And so when I pulled it out, looked at it, I'm like, yep. So I cut it out and I grabbed the resistors. It's only that big. And then I cut down the pigtails because we're in a small confined space. So cut down the pigtails, started the bike up. It ran, put everything back together, shoved it in the hole, and then called the customer. And I said, hey, it's Rich over King's Garage. He goes, hey, how's it going? I said, you hear that noise in the background? He goes, yeah. I said, that's your bike running. He's like, what? I go, that's your bike running. And so he's like, I'm like 10 minutes away. I'll be right there. I'm like, okay. So he comes down and I had already shut the bike off. He goes, hey, do you mind if I start it up? I'm like, no, go ahead. So he goes over, starts it up, and he's like, what the fuck? Like, and he's like, I don't understand. What did you find? And I told him, I said, it was the inline resistor. He's like, how'd you figure that out? I said, it's not about, sometimes it's not about figuring out. Sometimes it's about understanding, as like we talked about before.
Mm.
It's about really understanding how things work. And I said, I had remembered that you had said you had removed that from its original position to another remote position. I said, the only reason why I thought about that was because you had moved it. And I said, Kawasaki was one of the first companies that came with an inline resistor so that you couldn't hotwire the motorcycle. I said, the first thing I thought about was, I wonder if they did something with the inline resistor. And as soon as I pulled it out of the pocket where I saw it, that's what happened. He goes, I can't tell you how many thousands of dollars I've done in just
Oh, bless him.
diagnostic work. And he's like, I don't understand. And I said, no, it's just kind of the way that I look at things and how I do things. Excuse me. Um, the other part of my reputation is there's not a bike on the planet I won't work on. In my current shop right now, in front of me, behind you. Oh shit! Here I can
Hmm.
do this.
Go on, yeah,
You
let's
can
have a
see
look.
from where I'm sitting.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
that's a 2000. That's a 2002 Buell Cyclone. That's a 2024 ZX6R. That is a 2009 Daytona 675. That is a 1983 CB 750. So just in those few bikes alone covers a dynamic range
Yeah, right.
of the motorcycle industry. And so that's the thing that I'm known for. Um, it's hard for me to say no because I know in the way that I think about things, if I say no to a customer, um, many things happen. But one of the things that happens is I've wasted their goddamn time because however long it took them to look up information on my shop and decide that they want to ride their bike to my shop to get work done on their particular bike, and they show up here and I say no, I just wasted their goddamn time, which means they're going to have to go back home, research who else works on that particular bike, and then move forward. But the other thing that I think about is when I say no to a customer, I have a 100% chance of never retaining that business ever again, no matter what it is. And so that has always been my biggest problem. Is it's hard for me to say no because I understand, and as the years progress, I
Mm.
understand, especially when they come with particular bikes like this Buell that I showed you. This particular gentleman for the last 3 years has lived and worked in Texas. We're in California.
Yeah.
I have another Buell that had already been finished and delivered, but that gentleman lived. So from here, Fresno is about a 4 hour drive. And I had asked, and even this gentleman here, I asked him both, why you're going to pass hundreds and thousands of motorcycle shops to get here. And they said the same thing. Nobody works on these particular bikes. I said, yeah, nobody in the Harley industry is going to work on them because after Buell and Harley Davidson split up, the dealerships no longer stopped working on them. Independent Harley shops stopped working on them. And so it was hard to find somebody who works on them. And I said, well, how did you find me? And he said, they both said, hey, we belong to a Buell forum. And we asked people on there, hey, where do you get your bikes done? They said, your name came up like 4 or 5 different times. And I said, yeah, I have a few friends that actually have these Buells. I said, but I have done work on on Harleys. It's just a Sportster 1200 motor on a very different frame. That's all it is.
Mhm.
And I said, yeah, I work on them. And so, yeah, they would tow it down here from wherever the hell they live and drop it off just because I am one of very few people that works on it. Kind of the issue about that, um, like we had talked about, is
Yeah.
what we just talked about was the dynamic switch in the understanding. And the
Okay.
understanding is, yeah, that Buell Cyclone, that's a Harley Sportster 1200 motor in a very different frame, which means the only difference between this and a Harley is the structure of the frame and the suspension. Everything else outside is freaking Harley. But yet, if you work at a Harley dealership because of the relationship that's no longer there
Yeah.
between Eric Buell and Harley Davidson, everybody's like, we don't work on them. It's like, are you kidding me? And it doesn't. The way I look at it is, it's great for me
Yeah.
because people will bring that bike from wherever the hell they live and drop it off for me to work on it because I understand it's a goddamn Harley. It's just on a different frame, different suspension setup. It's
Yeah.
in my eyes, it's simple, but
Mhm.
that's the dynamic um, of being able to work on so many different platforms of bikes. Is they're all similar in certain ways, but a lot of things on them make them very different, which means you have to have a really good understanding that when you're going from a 2025, or 2024 Kawasaki ZX6, which is a brand new sport bike, to an '09 Daytona Triumph, Daytona 675. That is what, I don't know, shit, numbers. It's way too early to think about numbers. Uh, so it's what, 14-year difference bike
Mhm.
that are dynamically different. You got to
Mhm.
work on both. It's because you have to understand they work similar, but they're not similar all the way around. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
I think to answer your question about my reputation, it is sometimes so hard to really nail that down because there's so many things about me um, that make things very different just in the shop itself. The type of motorcycles that I work on, the type of customers and clients that I work for, do stuff for. Plus a lot of the other things, excuse me. Plus a lot of other things that I do that relate to the shop. It's hard to nail down any one thing on why it is and what type of reputation that I have. I think it would have to be if you came to my shop and asked my advice for something and I didn't know something about it. That would not be anywhere near my reputation. And it didn't matter what answer or what industry or what question you would have. And that was thanks to my mom. You know, I, I, I always equate a lot of things back to my parents and how I was raised.
Mhm.
My mom told me a long time ago, never become an expert in one thing, know a little bit about everything.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I didn't understand that. She goes, because if you know a lot about one thing, there's gonna be very few people on the planet that you'll be able to have really good conversation with. But if you know a little bit about everything,
Mhm.
you can talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And it didn't, you know, as a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid, you're like, I don't know what the hell she's talking about. It doesn't, I gotta go play it, mom. Thanks. But a lot of things that I have done in my shop relates back to the lessons that I learned from my parents. And it never even really came into play till many, many, many years ago. I was like, oh, you know what? I think this is what they were talking about. And so I do that because the way I look at it is without our parents, we wouldn't exist. And that's, to me, that's the true honor that I can pay back to my parents. But because both my parents they're both passed on. So the way that I can show them the honor and carrying the last name and
Mm.
carrying the lessons that they had taught me. was to become the more accelerated version of the boy or of the man that they envisioned I would be. And then to be able to do the things that I learned from them, even into today's world where it is not so common to pay tribute and honor back to your parents. I do every day, and I do not have a problem, and I do not have a qualm with that whatsoever because I will always explain it that way. You can say shit about anybody, but never say shit about your parents because if it wasn't for them, you wouldn't exist, period. And the simple fact that you're being a douchebag and a knucklehead pays disrespect back to your parents. Pay them respect because you have no idea what it took for them to raise you, to get you to the point where you're at just so you can take off, be on your own, and be a douchebag. No, do something better. If you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for your parents. Prove to them that you are going to become the man or the woman that they envisioned, that they hope you would become. And for me, that right there is part of my reputation that I have in this shop is because I will give advice kind of from that concept um, to customers or even really close friends or family that, they'll ask me things and I'll tell them like, well, my mom used to say, or my dad taught me this, and they do the same thing. They laugh, but they
Yeah.
understand that's kind of how
Yeah.
I do things because it's my way of invoking the original traditions that back in the 80s that we were raised under, that it somehow, some way kind of missed these last couple of generations,
Mhm.
but it took me a while to remember and realize them. And so what I do today is a payback kind of tribute to my parents. Every year for like the last 8 or 9 years around my birthday, which is April 2nd, because I worked as a control rider, track instructor, and I was still racing. Somewhere around my birthday, within a couple of days or that same weekend, I was always at the racetrack. And so I would always pay, honor back to those that are giving the happy birthday wishes, and that I only hope that through my eyes, my parents and my friends that are no longer alive can see the enjoyment that I'm able to bring myself in the hopes that they can actually enjoy it the same way that I do by seeing things through my eyes and how I do them. And so it's kind of stuff like that, but that's part of my reputation of doing that.
Mhm.
So it's hard to nail down any particular part of that answer for you as far as the question goes, but that's just a little part of kind of the reputation that I have.
Yeah, I think it speaks for itself. Your the story twice during what you just said, I got goosebumps. Of what you're genuinely not even joking. I was like, this is really nice to hear of how raw that is and how much of a that builds into your well everything you do. Almost would you say that's part of what your purpose is as well to or it helps build your purpose? And do
Um,
you feel like you have a clear purpose?
that has been that's kind of my universe in a sense,
Yeah.
um, because how do I say this? I had come to know and understand a lot about me. It's just like again, my parents. In life, there are no accidents. Things happen for a reason.
Mhm.
Um, and the way I look at it for where I'm at is I may not know what that reason is, but there's a reason that I need to be here. And there's a reason why I do the things that I do and the way that I do them and how I came to acquire the knowledge to be able to do those things.
Mhm.
No idea how or why, but I just know this is where I'm supposed to be because it's so in a sense it's kind of like a feeling, but at the
Mhm.
other end of it, it's not contractual. And what I mean by that
Mhm.
is, you'll always hear people, oh, I love my job, I love my job, I love my job. And I'll always tell people that, we have conversations about that. And I said, here's the difference between you and me. You love your job, and so do I, but there's a very dynamic difference. All right, what do you mean? I said, if they don't pay you, you go get another job somewhere else. I'm like, well, yeah, I got to make money. I said, so the job you love is contractual. You'll love it if you get paid for it. Like,
Mhm.
well, you get paid for it. I said, I don't get paid very much. And I said, but you have to understand dynamically what. And I told him, I said, I had done a million other things other than this motorcycle shop and made a hell of a lot more money. I said, doing this has nothing to do with money. I said, doing this is to, number one, prove a point. Number two, it grew into a passion. It grew into a hobby. And I said, a lot of you, because I spend so much time in the shop, bro, you need to get a hobby. Do you not understand? I'm getting paid to do a hobby. This
Yeah,
is
it's
my
the best.
hobby. I said, you know, it, and I told him, look, you got to understand, I don't love it every day. I don't. Sometimes I hate this place. I said, I
Yeah.
don't love it every day. I don't love it every week. I don't love it every month. Sometimes I want to walk the fuck away because it's just irritating. I said, but at the end of it all, no, I would never change it
Yeah.
because that adds the dynamic of, you know, here is another fire or issue you need to put out.
Mhm.
What are you going to do in your skill set and skill level to rectify the problem, bring it correct, and then move on? What are you going to do? And I would always explain it. And that was, that's just another test. I said, you know how you go to school and you have a test every week? I could have a test every day, every week, every month on something like this. I said, but the reason why I love to do this is because now I get to use my brain. Now I get to do
Yeah.
things that I actually like, and that's using my head. And I said, don't get me wrong. A lot of this stuff does require a thought. I said, but for like a brief second, I said, but when there's something that even I look at and go, "Fuck, I don't know. I need some time to think about this." And I said, there are times where I'll walk away from a bike for a month, but I never stop thinking about it. I said, because what I'm trying to do, I said, have you ever seen ants when they're running around? Sometimes they'll go back and forth to things. I said, that's
Mhm.
kind of like my head. It's like I'll go back and forth and thinking about the processes or the problems and the directions or the detours or, you know, why this would affect this, but it's indirect affecting the cause of the problem. So how do we get there indirectly? Is that the root of the problem, or are we missing something here in between? So that's in a small nutshell. That's kind of like how my brain works when I'm thinking about an issue or a problem, which sometimes it's very draining, but it's very rewarding, especially when you figure it out and go, I know what it is, and then walk over and yep, there it is. And it's one of those things. It's like a love hate relationship.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, you hate to love it, but you love to hate it. And so it's one of those things that it just kind of works out. But it's honestly, part of it's part of human growth in a sense. I do it on a mechanical side, but it's part of human growth because what I'm able to do here on the mechanical side builds from here. It builds from my brain and builds from your skill set and builds from your understanding.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's doing stuff like that. And I'm hoping I didn't get off track because I just lost track of what the question was. I am so sorry.
Not at all. No, no, not at all. I think from my side of things as well, just hearing how your brain works. This is why I wanted to reach out because I'd heard you speak on other podcasts and after we'd initially gone back and forward a couple of times, your brain is how it works is inspiring, and I think it's a story that will inspire a lot of people that are looking to build something or are able to focus on something and just see where it goes, and allow it to be allowed to be creative in their understanding of something and to allow it to develop into a business, into whatever. It doesn't necessarily need to have a I am doing this because of this outcome. I'm doing it because I just want to understand it,
Hmm.
which is where for me, I mean, I run my own business and I sell stuff and whatever, but I have a very similar thing where I've started just out of curiosity and then built that into a business. It just naturally built and built and built. And that's where I want to come across with the podcast. I want to speak to people like yourself that have everyone's got different ways of doing it and how they got there. And I think people watching this that are either looking to start a business or already doing a business or entrepreneurial mindset, they can see how somebody attack something and go, you know what, I could use those learnings in my life and I could change how I do this based on how you've done it. So I think it's a great answer, to be fair. I think it's really, really good.
It's one of the things that when we initially started talking, when you said it was going to be kind of like a 30, 45-minute conversation, I kind of laughed. I'm like, we're not even going to touch anything that has to do with me in 30 or 45 minutes. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
Um,
that's fair.
but it's kind of true the way that I look at how I got into this business. Um, it was in me, but I didn't know it. And what I
Mm.
mean by that was what I do today culminates everything that I've done before that. It has everything to do with how I was raised. It had to do with every single failure along the way. Because without you can't have success without failure. You can't because you learn valuable lessons off of failures.
Mhm.
And I've had this conversation before many times, and they're like, "Yeah, but you work for so many different places, and fire departments, and your own company for paramedic, and you worked in the movie industry as a sap medic, and you did a few stunts, and you've done. I don't understand why you say that those are failures." I said because my understanding and how I look at things, I am here today because I failed at those things. Like,
Yep.
wait, what do you mean? I said, if I didn't fail, I'd still be there.
Mhm. Yep.
That's how I look at it. I said, that's the thing you have to understand is when you leave to go to a different job, different industry, that means whatever you just had learned from the day before now ends. Now you become a different person based on location, where you're going to go to work, industry, whatever. If you're going to something completely different, you now have to become a completely different person. But in the hopes that the things that you had learned that you could keep in your back pocket or keep in your head, um, lessons that you had learned from other places will someday come back into play. Well, you'll have to reach back in your file memory banks
Yeah.
and pull those out and go, I kind of had a similar situation like this before. I'm not scared to do this. I think I can understand this. And for those, like you had said that we're looking to start businesses and stuff.
Mhm.
I hate to say it, and everybody, you might get a few comments about it. Don't go into business making money
Mhm.
because you don't have to open your own business to make fucking money.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that simple. Don't go into
That's
business
true.
making money to make money. You go into business like for myself, you know,
Mhm.
for making way more money than I make today. But the different industries and the amount of money that I don't do this because of that. I do this
Mhm.
because I found something in doing this. So no matter the industry I worked for or the amount of money that I made, there was always something missing. There's just I couldn't
Right.
put my finger on it. I just didn't understand.
Mhm.
And then when I got into this business here, it took a little bit before I really understood it. And what I understood once I realized it was I now have direct control of my future. I now have direct control over everything, which sounds cool until you understand what I just said. Control in everything, which means even when everything goes bad, you are in control of that. You
Yep.
can't always take the good and never take the bad. You have to take it. If you want that responsibility and everybody, I want to be the boss, I want to be the boss. Oh, yeah? There's going to come a day when you're going to look at it and go, fuck no, get somebody else in here to do this shit. I
This
don't want to do it.
sucks. Yeah.
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 And I said, that's the understanding. I said, you have to understand, you have to have a balance. You
Yep.
have to have a dynamic balance, when it comes to business and even in your own personal life and or your own personal universe. You have to have a balance because you can't always keep taking and not giving something up. And I would always explain to him, I said, here's the thing that I learned early on as a knuckleheaded kid, but got to understand better is karma is the execution of a balanced universe. I
Okay.
said, if you always keep taking and you never give back,
Mhm.
karma's going to take it from you when you least expect it and more than you expect to be taken. So that's how you have to look at it. I said, because we all talk about it. Karma's a bitch. Karma's not a bitch. Karma's the executioner. It's just you didn't pay attention. You kept taking and you never gave anything back.
Now it's too late.
Yeah. And now it's too late. Now you're going to have to suffer the consequences and deal with that. But
Yeah. Wow.
sometimes for business, it's not about money. I mean, yeah, no, it's not. I can think of a million other things to be doing that I would make money and not have to worry about this crap. However, I think for me, number one, because not everybody can do this. Not everybody can open their own business. Number two, nobody can do it in the way that I did, not understanding that I actually did it in a way that nobody does. Um, but just for your listening audience, and because I don't think we touched it, but when I
Yeah.
opened this shop, I actually had no formal training in motorcycles. I have no formal training in owning a motorcycle shop. I didn't even come from the motorcycle industry, and it wasn't until 20 years, 25 years before that I was on a motorcycle. So in essence, this is out of the blue, literally out of the blue. And I have like on the other podcast and
Yeah.
people that have come in here and asked me, well, how do you, it's kind of hard to explain. And I said, no, it's easy. It's hard to ask me. She goes, can you explain to my listening audience the best way to explain to them in layman's term on how you did this?
Hmm.
I said, yeah, it's pretty simple for me. I said, Tara, you work in the real estate industry. She goes, yeah. I said, okay, so tomorrow go to work and quit. She's like, okay. I said, then think about you're going to open up a restaurant. She's like, okay. And I said, now go find a place you want to have that restaurant, the building or cafe or whatever. And then once you decide where you want to have it, go and buy every piece of equipment that you're going to need to run that restaurant based on the type of food and the menu that you want to come up with. And then find, tables, chairs, place settings, and the setup on how you're going to do it. And then create a menu that you think people are going to like, and then start cooking off that menu. But at the same time, take their order, cash them out, and deliver their food, and give them, and clear the place out.
Hmm.
Now do that by yourself for 12 years. I said that's the best that I could describe what I've done. And I said
Mm.
I never talked about it. I never bragged about it. 'Cause that's just who I am. I will do things like that. If I find myself in a position where I think I'm pretty good at something, again, lessons from my parents. My parents always told me never go 50-50 ever, because if
Mm.
you're one foot in and one foot out, how much of a small percentage will it take for you to turn around and walk out and never know what kind of success you would have had?
Yeah.
I always said if you're going to do something, and even growing up as a kid, my parents never pushed me into an industry because of my athletic background. It was more, hey, let's just decide on what college you want to go to, and then when you get there, figure out what you want to do after sports. Okay.
Hmm.
And so my parents never pushed me in a particular industry. It was whatever it is you're going to do, just remember one thing: be the best. Whatever it takes for you to be the best. That's all you need to be. And so that concept stayed with me, And so I tell people when I opened this place, I that was a lesson I remembered. My parents always said, never go 50-50 because it takes a very small percentage for you to turn around, walk away, and never know your success. And I said, so I put everything that I had into the shop.
Yeah.
And they just kind of looked at me. I said, I mean everything. I said, I had cashed out any of my investments. I said, I literally had money and I shoved it in my safe and said, okay, after I open the shop, if all else fails and I get no work for the next year, I have enough money to pay the rent for 1 year. That's
Okay.
it. And figure it out from there. And I said, back then I was too young and dumb and inexperienced enough to know any better. But I was just like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. But I didn't realize that also was going to be lessons I was going to learn from,
Mm.
and really understanding, okay, you can't really always just do that, but where did you go from having just enough money to pay the rent to being here 12 years later?
Hmm.
What did you do to do that? And that's where the the gradual progression of understanding how to do things and work on bikes and the diagnosis part of it, um, because it's so hard to do things. It's so hard to really explain things to people,
Yeah.
to understand that the reason why the conversations ever came up about the magazine interviews and the podcast
Hmm.
is because I never really talked about it other than my really close friends. They all knew. They're like,
Yeah. Sure.
he's a little different. Just if
Did
you want to
they
talk to him about stuff, you can.
did they think because of the amount of effort you put in, like you said, like the first couple of years, you were 7 days a week, all it. Did they ever say this guy's crazy? Like he works, he's like a machine. Like is that the kind of words they'd used?
That's what I get from them. That's the one thing I've known for is working a lot. Yeah, it's there are times during the race season where I'm known to still be open at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, working on bikes because I have so much work, or that's the only time that I can work on my own stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is why the hell not? What's it going to hurt? Is it going to cost me time? Could it cost me everything? It could, but what else are you going to do? Or what better do you have to do? You know,
Yeah.
is there something else you're going to do with your life that's going to give you the same amount of being satisfied and energized and focused and changed and directed?
Mhm.
But I think a lot of people are afraid of it, and that's why they don't do it. They're afraid of
Yeah.
the what ifs. And the thing that I tell them is, the thing about fear is fear creates strength. That's
Mhm.
what it does. Because when you're fearful, it's not like you're reckless. When you're fearful, you're very calculated
Mhm. Mhm.
because you fear making one wrong step. And if people don't understand that concept, because we do it all the goddamn time, but if they don't think on it from a broader scale into a business,
Yeah.
they're never going to do it because they think, oh, if we get into business, we can lose everything. Yeah, you can. I'm not going to lie to you, and yourself,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. 100%.
you can lose everything. But here's the reason why. It's because maybe you didn't think it through enough. And
Mhm.
I hate to say it in that concept. That I have learned now. But back then when I opened the shop, that I hate to say it, but that wasn't my thinking. I didn't think that way. It was if I had thought about it more, honestly, I think the shop would have turned out different if the shop turned out at all, had I thought it more, had I thought about it more. And I think because of that, head first bravado, I can do whatever the hell I want to do kind of
Yeah.
concept, and let's just do this. And, you know, I guess in today's wording, it's called, FAFO, fuck around, find out. I told Tara, I said back then I had my own. She's like, what was your own? How hard could it be?
I mean, that does make sense from what you've told me as well.
Yeah, and I
And
told her,
it's
I said
true.
that
Yeah.
it is very true.
Yeah.
If you don't think about it, yes, you can lose everything. But that's part of the gamble. And I get it. There are not very many people out there that like to gamble. But
Yeah.
for some odd reason, there are very few of us that look at us and that look at it and go, that's not a gamble. It's a
Mhm.
calculation.
Mhm.
Because if gambling is a miscalculation, then what happens if we actually calculate things? What if
Mhm.
we calculate out on what we think it's going to take, what we're going to do to put things in place to minimize having any failures that we've come across in the past, to minimize ever making those things again? And how do we go to attract better clients or more clients based on what it is that we already do? Or do we change the structure of the business and what it is that I do? And how do we change that? And what do we want to change it for? So it's all of those questions that come to play in when you're going to do a business. You actually have to ask yourself those questions. You have to answer them. Is there a concept? Did I know that this place was going to be what it is today? Oh, hell no. I no no effing way. Didn't Not a clue, nothing. I did not. This was the furthest thing. Had you told me 13 years ago,
Mm.
hey, there's going to come a time in your life where you're going to own, now 12 motorcycles. You're going to be racing in the motorcycle race industry. You're going to have one of the largest independent motorcycle shops that's going to have a really great reputation in the area.
Yeah.
I'd look at you and go, I don't even own a motorcycle today. What the fuck are you talking about? But I use that concept
Yeah.
is as this is what can happen
Mhm.
if you understand you can do things if you put your mind to it. If you think you have an idea, who's to tell you no? If you think you have an idea, who's to say no, that'll never work? And I said, it's always the naysayers are the ones that won't do it because they're afraid of their own shadows. And I said,
Mhm.
I'm not like that. I said, if I think I'm good at something or I find out that I am good at something, it's concept I learned from my parents. Okay, if you're good at it, do whatever it takes to become the best. And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how long it takes to get there. Do whatever you have to do to become the best. Because if you think you're good at this and you want to be the best, you need to push everything and anything that you have to make it happen, which comes with a lot of sacrifice.
Mhm.
And the sacrifices are some of them are very small, but a lot of the sacrifices that we make for our own businesses are just enormously emotionally, it's just they're taxing and they're very draining and they're energy draining. And a lot of people don't understand the concept
Yeah.
or the understanding that, in order for somebody to be like we talked about, to to have success, you have to have failure. Part of that failure, sacrifice. Some people have sacrificed their homes, their family, their relationships, their loved ones, their vacations, their fancy cars, and all of the things that we can list that we wanted if we become successful and famous.
Yeah.
Those are things you lose just to get to that
Well,
point.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard for people to understand because like we talked about before, they only want to see things. Oh, I want to get into a business because I want to own my own business. I can be my own boss. And they can name off all these me things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what they don't realize, a lot of it's not got anything to do with you. It's got to do with your business and how you do things and the clients you take care of.
And I can see with yours as well, like the value and the importance you put on everything that your reputation means to the customer. That's by the sounds of it, from how my understanding is, what the customer sees it as, and what they already know they're getting from you without even picking up the phone, from whether it's word of mouth or however they've heard of you, is that is the driver. Because your own personal side of things, aside of like, I want to understand things and fix things, it really looks like you're building out this brand, this business brand. Everything that you're doing is because you can help other people with their issues or whatever it might be. And I think seeing that a lot of people, as you said, start a business because they want to make loads of money. They want to, very selfish things, but how do you get there is the actual business. That's the interesting bit. That's the thing that you can start any business, of course you can, but it needs to be, or in my understanding, is my business. I help people complete collections. I help people do the things that I do, and the same with you. You help the people, and that builds it and builds around. It just spreads further and further afield because of everything that you're doing, and that how you make them feel, then it just radiates from there outwards, doesn't it?
Um, yeah, I didn't really think about it till you just started saying it. King's Garage has a reputation for helping people that have nothing to do with motorcycles.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just a much broader spectrum because that's kind of how I think about things, I guess. I think about things from a much more outside the box thought process,
mhm.
um, which equates to what it is that I have to offer. It's always going to be outside the box. It has nothing to do with motorcycles.
Um,
Motorcycles is just the caveat of what I do, but it's only a small part of what it is that I actually do.
100%. It's the service that you offer, and the care and the attention to detail. There is so much more to it than fixing someone's bike. That's the truth of it. It really is. And I think it's quite refreshing as well to hear about your relationship with failure. Nobody looks to go and just fail at stuff. That seems counterintuitive, but to be okay with failing, or to be okay with, like you sort of alluded to earlier as well. I've ran three or four businesses up to this point. This is uh, a business that has given me and my family more freedom, and things that I didn't even know I needed or wanted in life. And it's fantastic, and it's at a point where I can help other people with everything that I'm doing on this side. The the points of failure, as you say, the other businesses that I've done and the other work that I've done, I too see it as partially failures, not in the fact that it didn't it wasn't great, it didn't achieve something, it didn't fix something, all of that is right. It did, and it was great, and all that, but I'm not doing it anymore. And in my life it didn't work out, and this is a better path to take. So I also see that as like a, not a negative of like, oh, sorry, me, just as it's a failure. It didn't work out. I'm moving on, and this is the thing that I love to do. And like yourself, it's nice to speak to somebody who's got a like-minded reaction to that as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, like you said before and touched on, that a lot of people don't really understand. They don't conceptualize. They don't have a understanding because they don't have a depth to their thought process when it comes
Yeah.
to understanding a business. And it's very, for them, it's very surface, it's very shallow, very me. When you get, into the root of things, understanding the business isn't what happens out in the showroom. It's what happens in the back room.
Yeah.
The understanding of whatever it is, the understanding of the product and how that product is going to be put out and what it is that we're going to put out in the product now, the best way for us to do that. And do we have the right people in place that can help facilitate us to be able to do that? And can we put it in a way that's very presentable to the large majority of the general public? But if it's not, then how do we find somebody that can wear multiple hats to understand different dynamics and how people think and why it is that we would want them to look at or pursue and or find or buy our product? What makes our product different? Is it the product itself, or is it the way that we sell it? And how do we sell that product? Is it based on the presentation of the person that's giving it, or is it the misunderstanding of the presentation because the person giving it's perfect, but the presentation sucks because they didn't understand the concept of what the product is?
Hmm.
No idea how that rattled just off the top of my head, but
That was good.
um, that's kind of the concept on what people don't understand is there's just so much more that most people want to put blinders on, and I don't know, it's sad because, and the reason why I say that is because there are fewer and fewer mom and pop shops in a sense that are opening here in the States,
Okay.
unless it's out of pure necessity. This is the only way we for whatever reason can't get a job, let's figure something out. Which kind of reminds me of a funny subject that Tara had asked me. We were talking about all the places that I've worked, and because off camera we had talked about it, and she goes, "Wait, so she goes, so what industry did you have the longest employment at?" I go, "You mean at any one time?" She's like, "Yeah, you've done so much," and she's like,
Yeah.
"You know, I don't." She goes, "I'm trying to figure out where you would have stayed the longest," and I said, "I know exactly where." She's like, "Where?" I said, "The longest employment I've ever had at any one entity was a place that I actually had to produce myself and open up my own goddamn company." She's like, "Wait, what?" I go, "Yeah." I said, "The longest employment that I had at any one place was here when I opened up this shop 12 years ago." And I said, I had a concept, and it was kind of something that was grilled in me when I was a kid. Never stay at any one place that's going to waste your time.
Hmm.
And I said,
Hmm.
even in the automotive industry, I said, I would stay at the place maybe 3 to 5 years if it wasn't anything more that I was going to learn, um, more so to help myself progress as a skill set, or progress as somebody that can be better for the company. Then I need to go find a place that I can do that at, a place that I can grow. And I said that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand is growth doesn't mean your pocketbook and it doesn't mean your paycheck. Growth means in case that pocketbook or that paycheck disappears, what do you have behind you that you can take on to the next company? If you never progressed and or promoted yourself forward or looked at getting higher, a much better education in the field that you're working in, then you're going to start right back at the bottom again because that's how you came into this company. And I
Yeah.
said, that's kind of how I look at it. It's just, you have to understand that concept. And I said, that's just the way it works. I said, there's nothing wrong with doing that. There's not. I have many of my friends and my loved ones and people that are family to me that are in that situation. But I never say anything about that because we are dynamically different. For them, they have a really good life. They have, things that they want. And I said, but what they want and what I want are two different things. I said, it doesn't mean that one's better than the other. It just means one's a different thought process. And I said, for me, it's more about growth.
And it's that growth mindset that I think sets people apart. A lot of people outside of business and outside of doing what they do as a passion see it as an unhealthy, unattainable thing. Like you could just grow forever and never stop. Where does it end? Whereas what I think Rich is saying resonates with me more of it's that never ending chase for expansion and just seeing where you could take this. What does being the best mean? So I'm going to leave that thought with you. Comment below what you thought to this episode. I've got so many more questions for Rich. We actually had technical difficulties after this part of the episode where we just couldn't get back on and couldn't continue the conversation. I couldn't hear a thing he was saying, basically. So we will come back to it. I have questions about how he runs the brand, how he's built the brand, how he employs other people. There is a story that he's going to share where he was a stunt driver for Batman. So there's a lot more to discover, a lot more to discuss, and I believe Rich is definitely going to be one of those people that we can have back on the pod. If you've got any questions for Rich that you would like me to ask for the next time we get together, please write it below and let us know. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you.